We have 3 potatoes already peeled, 1 small onion, which I like to use a yellow onion. You could use yellow or white, whatever you prefer. We're going to need an egg for this amount, some salt and pepper, and I like to use matzo meal for the binder. Some people like to use flour. Some use matzo meal. Too many cooks in the kitchen right now. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to grind our potatoes. So I have a food processor. We're going to start with that. But the first thing we need to do is get our oil in the pan heating up, because we don't want to have to wait for that when we're ready to do the latkes. So I like to use canola oil and a cast iron pan. So we're going to head over to the stove and do that. So when we fry, we're going to have maybe a ½ inch of oil coating the bottom of the pan. I like to use a pan that's got, wide bottom and kind of angled sides so that it's not unevenly cooking. And we're going to put our heat at about medium high so that our oil gets to about 375 or 400, right around there. You want to have a nice hot oil for frying. I don't fry a lot, but that's what I know about frying. All right, so our oil is heating up, so we'll go back to the counter and start doing our prep for the potatoes. So in the potatoes, you can either, I like to use a food processor. You can grate them if you want, but I find that the food processor makes them perfect consistency. So I'm just chopping the potatoes into manageable size pieces to feed into the food processor. So here we go. We're going to start processing. Very exciting stuff. Questions so far?
Yeah, what kind of food processor do you have?
I'm sorry?
What kind of food processor do you have?
It's called Esther's food processor. I don't own a food processor, so I had to go pick up my mother's.
KitchenAid or Cuisinart?
Hers is a Cuisinart.
Okay.
Do you have to squeeze the excess moisture out of the potatoes? You do that? Oop, strategically ignored. Now he can't hear me anyway.
Squeeze.
And then we're going to put the onion in. Almost every potato.
This is squeezely.
Same way with the onion.
Oh,
So we're going to take the onion and potato mixture and we're going to put it in the bowl. And the key I found to good latkes is you want to try and get all the liquid out of the potatoes. You'll find that it's a much more crispy and delicious latke if you do manage to get the starch out. But then we're going to add it back in. So that's one of the keys to the good latkes is we're going to take the latkes, or I'm sorry, the potatoes, put them in the cheesecloth. I would recommend cheesecloth. You can use a towel or something if you prefer something else, but anything that you can use to squeeze the liquid out of the potatoes. So we're gonna make a little ball with the cheesecloth. I'm gonna give myself a wooden spoon because that always helps. We're gonna wrap the cheesecloth around the wooden spoon and then start turning, and you should be able to see the liquid just kind of starts pouring out of the potatoes. You can give it a little squeeze. And what we'll end up with is a bunch of liquid on the bottom of the bowl that we're going to use for later. So once we get everything nice and dried out, we will set it aside until we're ready for it. We'll do the rest of the potatoes. With the amount of potatoes we have, I should be able to do it in 2 squeezes. Cheesecloth isn't good for more than 1 use, or a couple of squeezes, so you want to make sure you have plenty of cheesecloth on hand if you're planning on doing a lot of latkes. Again, you can just see how much liquid is in the potatoes. They just start dripping wet with starch. Don't even need the spoon really at this point. I'm just squeezing with my hands and turning like a sponge. So then when we're done, after only a few potatoes, we've got quite a bit of liquid in the bottom. And we're going to let that liquid sit for a bit. And we are going to put our potatoes all back in to a bowl by themselves. Potatoes and onions. So now what we've got is we've got a pretty dry mixture of potatoes and onions. And to that, we're going to start adding our seasonings and the rest of our goodies. So as I said before, you can use matzo meal or flour. I think matzo meal is probably the better choice. I don't usually do a lot of measuring. I don't follow recipes very well, so I'm just winging it. So I'll put in like maybe a tablespoon of, maybe 2 tablespoons of matzo meal for 3 potatoes. So you can adjust from there if you're cooking for more or less. And then also an egg with 3 potatoes. I think 1 egg should be enough. I'm just going to crack her right in there. And then we're going to mix it all up. And so what I'm looking for is kind of a consistency that we can work with so that we can make sort of like a paste of latke and potato and onion and matzo meal. And the starch that we put back in there will also help to thicken everything up. So what I do is I usually just mix it all up, and then I see how the consistency is, and if I need to add something, I will. In this case, if I felt like it was too dry, also watch for big pieces of onion. If you feel like it's too dry, you can add another egg. And a lot of times what you'll find is that it gets more wet as you go, just because the potatoes are going to continue to produce moisture. So once we feel like we've got a pretty good consistency, we're going to get ready to then form our potatoes. But I think our starch still needs a little bit of time to set and develop on the bottom of the bowl. So what we're looking for is at the bottom of the bowl, there will be just a thin layer of kind of like paste. And after I would say maybe 5 or 10 minutes, you'll see the paste, and then there'll be liquid on top. And so what we'll do is we'll dump the liquid out, and we're just going to scrape that paste off the bottom, and we're going to put the paste into the mixture and then just mix it all up. But I think we've got another minute or 2. So does anybody have any questions up till this point?
When do you put in the salt and pepper?
Salt and pepper is going to go in at the same time, either now or when the starch goes back in. I usually will put a light salt and pepper in now, and then let people season to their taste when we're done. I do like to salt things, but I know some people aren't into salt, so Usually if I'm making for a bunch of people, it'll just be a minimal level of salt and pepper, and then they can always add it if they like. So one of the questions that I've been getting in the time leading up to this is, you know, where my inspiration comes from for cooking. And you heard that my mother was responsible for turning me off to her latkes, in which case I thought maybe I could do that, and I tried it, and that's how I ended up cooking this. But I guess my interest in cooking started from a pretty young age, and I actually had a mentor when I was a child that I would turn to when I had questions about cooking. And I contacted him, and he was nice enough to send us a video clip that we could play during the Mavens program. So I think, you know, we have a minute for the starch. So at this point, I think I'm going to share the video that he sent along. So enjoy. Hopefully it works. I'm still working it up. 1 second. Or maybe I can just do it. Bear with me 1 moment. All right, I think I've got it here. So I'm going to share my screen and enjoy the video.
Chicky in the basket. And whose birthday is the chicky? And over here, the basket. Hey, chicky! Oh, come here, chicky! Oh, there, oh, that is the
All right, so that was my mentor. Stop sharing my screen. All right, can we hear me now? Everybody back? We're good? Yes? All right. So that was a little video that my mentor was nice enough to send. So at this point, it's hard to see, but at the bottom of the bowl, it's kind of the same color, but we do have some paste developing. Not a lot because it's not been long enough, but ultimately what you'd want to do is wait a little bit longer, dump this liquid out, and then on the bottom, there's going to be a paste that forms, and that's going to be the starch that we're going to mix back in. So I'm going to give it just another minute because we really don't have a good starch formed yet. So we are going to then, let's put our salt and pepper in, and we can season it a little bit that way. I like to use a grinder, fresh ground pepper, a few grinds. Like I said, you can always add more when you want. And then some salt, about a teaspoon, yeah. And we'll mix that all up. And our mixture is still pretty dry. I might add another egg if I feel like it's not going to bind well enough at this point. We want it to be something we can form, you know, into almost like a ball with a spoon without too much trouble having it fall apart. Well, that's the look we're going for right now. It's a little dry. You can see there's a little moisture in there on the bottom, but we really want something that is a sort of a loose, wet mixture. So I'm going to go ahead and put whatever starch we have in now. We're going to pour the excess liquid in to the sink, get rid of that. And you can see at the bottom, if I can scrape it off, there's really not a lot, but we do have some starch forming at the bottom here that we're going to use to mix back in. And that'll just act like a thickener. So the longer it sits, the wetter it gets, just because of the potatoes starting to dry out or to lose their moisture. So you want to continually mix your potato mixture. If you're making a lot of latkes, you'll find that, you know, the first few potato latkes are not going to be as wet as the next few. So you want to continually mix it so that you work that moisture back into your potato latkes. So I think it looks good enough. I don't think I'm going to add an egg at this point. It's starting to come together. It's starting to bind a little bit. It seems like something I can make a shape out of. So, and we want a bunch of like flaky edges. We want it to be, we don't want it to be a perfect circle. We want it to be crispy. And so a lot of those edges, if we have a coarse latke mixture, it helps to make it crispy because there'll be more exposed edges on the latke. All right, so we are going to take the mixture over to the oven and get ready to fry it up. So I think I mentioned already that I like to use canola oil for frying. You could use vegetable oil. I think that's probably about the only two oils I would use for this. So we're going to test our oil, and the way we do that is to check the temperature. If I can find my, oh, here it is. So every kitchen should have a thermometer. And we're looking for the oil temperature to be about 375. And it's about 350, so it should be good. We're going to turn it up just a little bit. Like we said, we want the oil to be nice and hot. For frying, if you don't have it nice and hot, it just makes for a less crispy latke. So we want it to be nice and hot and crispy. So then I'm going to grab a spoon, like a soup spoon. That's going to be what I form the latkes with. And you also want to have a metal spatula, and then also another spatula just to be like the helper. Because when we get in there to flip it, we're going to kind of make a sandwich out of it and then flip it over. So hopefully it doesn't make a big mess. We don't know how to put out grease fires. All right, so we are ready to go. So I'm going to take just sort of a heaping soup spoonful, and I'm going to put that right into the oil. And I'm going to press down a little bit just to make it take its shape a bit. And it should be a little bit loose. You should be able to kind of play with it a little bit. It shouldn't, like I said, it shouldn't be a pancake. It shouldn't be perfectly round. It's going to be sloppy, and it's going to have a lot of rough edges, and that's going to help you form crispy latkes. All right, so we're going to put 3 in the pan at a time. You can see the height of the oil is not enough to cover the potato pancakes, but it should be high enough to coat maybe half of it. So then we're going to leave it sit for maybe a minute or two here. We're going to watch our edges. We're going to look for browning, crispy edges. Once we get to that point, we'll kind of take a peek at the underside and then decide if it needs to stay in for longer or we flip it over at that point. So not a whole lot to do here. Just sit and watch frying potatoes. Anybody know any good jokes? So we'll give it a little bit longer. If you want, you can kind of give them a little
Excellent
tap
camera
just to
work.
make sure that they're all nice and flat and touching the pan. And what I would do if I was making a whole bunch of them is I would probably make one first and then taste it and see how the seasoning is and see if you want to add anything else before you commit to a whole batch of potato latkes. So you can start to see this one looks like it's starting to brown and crisp on the bottom. I'm going to take a look and see. Looks pretty good. I think I'm going to leave the other ones a little bit longer. But this is sort of the look we're going for. It's got the rough edges. There's a lot of them. You can see it gets really crispy on the edges. And then I would suggest having a drying rack, like a cookie rack, cooling rack, I guess they call it, with some paper towel underneath to catch the grease that falls off. And we'll just leave it sit there for a minute or two and let go of any excess grease or oil that is still coming off the latkes. Be very careful when you flip them over. You don't want to make a big mess with the oil. Depending on how big your potato pancakes are, you could leave them in for longer or shorter. Depends on the size. That's pretty much it. I mean, it's just going to be another minute or two, and then we're going to have latkes ready to eat. I hope that this was worth your time, because there's really not a lot of mystery to it. Hopefully it seems as easy as it is, because it's not a very difficult thing. So it's just mainly about checking to make sure that you have it fully cooked, and this brown color that's on the top right now is the color we want to see on the bottom.
So Todd,
take a look at the one that we did first, and it looks pretty good. So we're going to take that one out, put it on the drying rack. We'll leave these other ones in here another minute or so. And just, know your stove, know your pan. You want to make sure you get a good consistent heat. So that's why I like using cast iron, because it does hold its heat very well. And when you're cooking a lot of latkes, the reheating time of the oil can slow you down. So you want to have a pan that can hold the heat, and you can churn out a bunch of latkes within a short amount of time, because they're always best when eaten hot. So you don't want them sitting around for too long.
Shelley asked what the biggest mistake people make is.
I think the biggest key to making latkes, or the biggest mistake, if you want to call it, that people would make would be to not do the starch, to not squeeze out the potatoes, to dry them out, and then to reintroduce the starch back into it. I think that's a key component of making latkes, and it seems to really give it the right consistency. That, and I do like using the matzo meal better than flour. I think flour gives it too much of a potato pancake kind of consistency, and while these are, potato pancakes, I guess we're looking for something that's a little bit different. I don't deliver. I can certainly put it in the mail if you feel like it's something you would appreciate coming in an envelope. So I'm going to go ahead and get these last few. I think we have enough here for probably 3 more. And then I think we're probably ready to try one. Grab a fork.
The biggest question, Todd, is do you use sour cream or applesauce?
Do I use sour cream or applesauce? Is that what the question was?
Yes.
Yeah, so, I mean, I don't put applesauce on French fries. I don't put applesauce on my latkes either. So I think it's one of those crazy things that if you feel like you have to do it, fine. But I am not subscribing to that line of thinking. So sour cream is the short answer.
Not ketchup, since you put that on French fries?
I don't. No, I'm a purist and I only use ketchup for French fries.
I know
Well,
someone who
maybe
puts
ketchup on this would be okay.
I know someone who puts ketchup on latkes because they're like hash browns.
I know somebody that puts syrup on them. Can you believe that?
Really?
Yeah. All right, so let's see what we got here. We got a nice crispy outer coating. Oh yeah, nice and crispy. And then the inside looks pretty good, nice and fluffy. Yeah, if you can see that consistency there, you got your crispy and your fluffy. Crispy, fluffy, crispy, fluffy. Mmm. Delicious. Could use a little more salt, but that might just be me.
Oh.
All right. Well, that pretty much concludes our Maven's latke making.